Hello, this is Dave, W7UUU, and today I'm with Steve, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his background in amateur radio. So take it away, Steve.
Oh, greetings all. I'm Steve Dightman. My first call was K7SSC. Some people dub me as the Supersonic Chicken. My current call is Alpha Foxtrot 7 Yankee Delta. I've had an amazing ride with ham radio over the years. I got started in the actual journey of ham radio itself when I was in high school. My story really starts well before that. My father told the story that one of my first toys I played with was an extension cord when I was a toddler. I was interested in this extension cord, and when he saw I was putting the plug into the wall, that he had to do something about that, and he cut the probe end of the extension cord off. A little later, a few years later, I still had that extension cord, and they were making crimp adapters for plugs, and I had seen my father use them a few times, but I knew enough about electricity that if you had insulation, it wouldn't work. So I stripped the insulation off, put the plug on it, plugged it into the wall. It immediately arc flashed in front of me, and that started my learning about electronics. My story comes in two parts. Before I took the class in ham radio from Jerry Seligman, I'll talk about that in a few minutes. My real learning about electronics started the day my uncle showed up with an amplifier, a speaker, a microphone, and a record changer. I put this assembly together and started playing with it intensely. We created a Christmas card with my two sisters and myself with the radio station identification call of SMD, Steve, Maureen, and Donna. So I started playing with the idea of radio communications at a real early age. This was in the 4th grade. In the 6th grade, my uncle showed up again with another amplifier and a stereo tone arm for a turntable. And it was just the tone arm, so I had to figure out how to mount this tone arm on the turntable, and so I made that work. In the 7th grade, I entered this system that could play stereo, and this is before anybody in the general public knew that there was such a thing as stereophonic sound. Entered it into the school science fair when I was in the 7th grade, won first prize. It was such a novel hit, and I had some other electronic gadgets that I had made, solenoid-driven relays to turn the power on and off, and some other automation things like that. I played a lot with hi-fi electronics. That was in the days of Allied radio and night kits, and we would spend hours and hours drooling over the amplifiers and speakers and night kits and such as that. I spent a considerable amount of time building a home broadcast studio, pretend, the control room, and I designed and built wiring and switches that I could remote control amplifiers and speakers and such as that throughout the house. My dad had rebuilt the flooring in the house, and we put in outlets or outlet panels where I could get to, and I could run wires from my bedroom down the side of the house underneath the crawl space, and I was capable of putting speakers everywhere. So I had a lot of fun doing that. And so that all started with the 4th grade. So moving to chapter 2, my mother came to me one day. I'm in my freshman year of high school, and she said, she showed me this little clip of an article, just a little tiny thing, about a class in ham radio down at the vocational school. And I said, oh, that sounds interesting. I had known that there was such a thing in ham radio, but I knew no hams, and I had no idea where to get started. I had seen the Radio Amateur's Handbook in the library, but I really had no clue. So I showed up at Jerry Seligman's class. He was W5YFS at the time, and he had just arrived here from Texas. He was an aircraft simulator maintenance person working out at McCord. So I proceeded to enroll in that class. We went to class twice a week for 3 hours a session. There were 3 overall semesters, doing 162 hours in that class, and Jerry was very, very thorough about training about electronics. So I learned how tubes work, I learned how resistors and capacitors and how they worked and interplayed with circuits. And so all of this is going on while I'm going to high school full time. Kind of a fun story here is I asked the student counselor for the school if I could get credit for going and taking this extra class in my high school transcript. And he says, no way, you can't go to you can't take night school while you're going to day school. Well, I did it anyway. I just ceased talking about it. Because I was learning electronics really, really well from Jerry, I built my first novice type transmitter with a 6AG7 oscillator and a 6L6 final. It was good for about 30 watts, crystal controlled, of course, and built that and made it work. And I also built an electronic keyer, made that work, and so that set me on the course of building ham radio equipment.
What was your first receiver that you used with that transmitter?
Good question. I made my money by mowing lawns. I had about 30 lawns, so I was one busy guy during school. I actually had enough money that I went down to C&G Electronics and bought the Drake 2B receiver.
Oh, wow.
Really good receiver.
Still is to this day.
Ham radio use, yeah. When I bought the receiver, I got to know Dennis Rainier. Now, he'll show up again later. He was the ham shack manager. I started building things, and I decided, because I didn't have a lot of money, I had some money because of my gardening business, but I didn't have a lot of money, so I really figured I had to build everything. And I decided I wanted a mobile transmitter, and it had to be small enough. But this was in the days where single sideband was coming out, so of course this transmitter should be capable of single sideband. But there was a lot of AM going on too, so it should be capable of AM. So I started pulling out the books and buying books to learn how circuits work for how do you create single sideband. What are the practicalities of AM plate modulated? And then how do mixers work? How do oscillators work? How do you keep an oscillator stable? So I spent considerable time studying those things as I was going through high school. When it came to my senior year of high school, I had physics and chemistry, and I was a lab assistant in the physics lab. For the second year, I wanted to do a Physics 2 course, and so I talked to my teacher about it, and a friend of mine did that. We were both interested in the Physics 2 course, and he says, well, we can do this if you take on a project that I can give you a grade on, but I don't have time to tutor you. So I and my friend were the only two students that have ever taken Physics 2 at Stadium High School. It is a course that was created for us and has not existed since then.
Wow.
I used this transmitter design and fabrication, so I had already had about a year's worth of work or more into the design of it, and I started building it. I had the tube layout, I had the transformer layout for the modulation transformer. It was a pair of 6146s in the final, modulated by a pair of 807s. I studied the different ways of making a single sideband, and I had picked one, and I had studied oscillators and mixers that would be necessary to put all this together and design circuits to do that. Of course, I was looking at everything on the outside of the this museum here is a copy of Bill Orr's W6SAI's radio handbook, and that was instrumental. I learned every circuit in that handbook, is going through and doing the design on this. And so I started putting it together, and that was my senior project for Physics 2. That really put the icing on top for the continuation of learning electronics. 1961, I went up to the FCC office as we were completing Jerry's class and got my advanced class license. I almost had 20 words a minute, CW, but didn't quite have it. I had 20, but I figured I needed 22 to be able to pass the test. So I never did that, but I got my advanced, and at that time the advanced class license written test was the same as the extra test.
The code speed was 13, wasn't it?
So for the advanced class, yes, the code speed was 13 words a minute, which I had solid. So that is one of the topics we learned in class, and of course all the testing for all classes of license was at the FCC office in Seattle.
So you said general, but earlier you said advanced.
So I wound up getting my general, and then right around the corner I got my advanced as I was finishing.
Gotcha.
So my call sign then was, as I mentioned before, K7SSC. Oh, a funny story along the way. Many of you know who Chip Margelli was. Unfortunately, he's a silent key today. Chip Margelli lived about a block and a half away from me. His father was the choir director at Stadium High School, and through Stadium High School connection, I got the job of mowing Chip Margelli and his father's lawn in my gardening business. And that was before, and Chip was a younger guy, and I had no idea that he was interested in ham radio then, but later when I got on the air and had this 6L6 transmitter working, Chip and I had met each other through the radio club, and we decided one day that we would try to work each other on light bulb dummy loads, and we did. I met Chip a few years ago, about 5 years ago, down at Seaside, Oregon. I did not recognize him at all, but I saw his name badge, and with the name Chip, I asked him, "Well, are you Chip Margelli?" And he says, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm Steve." And I gave him my call, and he says, "Oh, wow." And I asked him then about if he remembered the light bulb story, and he says he did. In the early days in high school, during Jerry's class, Jerry invited me out to field day for the radio club, and then I went out to field day at Joe Asman's place, and where field day operations were along both sides of an airstrip, and we used a worn-out chicken coop as a cook shack and restaurant to feed the crew. And I was just blown away. I was just absolutely blown away with, that August I got over to the radio club, introduced and joined the radio club.
What year was that?
1962. So in those years, our radio club meetings were, there was a meeting on the second and fourth Wednesday, and the meetings were held downstairs in the radio club in the area that is now known as the classroom. The complete wall had not been put in, so the actual room formed the classroom in what is known as the Lou room, or HF and repeater room today. Funny story there, or maybe not so funny, was the smoke got so thick in that area that it was, you could hardly see across the room. So I joined the club, and that's where I really began to blossom and grow as a ham. There are 6-meter transmitter hunts were going on the day, and I have lots of stories to tell about that. All emergency communications in Tacoma, Pierce County was orchestrated here at the Radio Club, and I became involved with those activities. Kind of in summary here, I would like to recognize that I had many mentors that I'd like to mention. First off, of course, is Doc Spike. We are in the Doc Spike Museum at this moment, W7OS. And Doc was a mentor in, I would say his grace and his appreciation of people was just outstanding. He was friends with everybody. And in those days, not everybody in the Radio Club was friends with everybody else. Today, that's largely not true. But in those days, there were cliques and there were different fiefdoms and so forth. But Doc Spike was just a glorious person to know. I visited his ham shack a number of times, and this receiver right here, I believe, is the receiver he had in his shack, and his transmitter, a Heathkit Apache, is down over here. Another person I'd like to mention is Dwayne Lewis, K7KSZ. Dwayne was a really good guy with hands-on electronics, and he did a lot of work with converting mobile commercial radios to ham radio frequencies. My first 2-meter radio was a Motorola 5V installed in my 1957 Chevy. Dwayne tuned that up, and I built the control cable or remodeled the control cable and put it in the car, and I had lots of fun with that. That was during my college years over at Olympic College in Bremerton. I was able to work back into Tacoma with a sewer pipe antenna on 2 meters on a regular basis. Scotty Huntley, another gem of a personality. I first got to know Scotty really well when I was riding along with him on the 6-meter bunny hunts. Well, when I started dating or becoming really interested in girls, I got some tune-up lessons on how to dance with Scotty. John Kelly, W7KKN. John's job at the time, until he retired, was he was communications manager for Pierce County Sheriff. In other words, all the technicians and all the facilities that Pierce County Sheriff used for radio communications was in John's bailiwick. And he was a very active, very strong member of the Radio Club of Tacoma. I learned from John was not any direct stories, but John taught me a lot about leading from wherever you are. We would have a meeting of the 5 or 6 people that were involved in leadership of public service and emergency communications. Towards the end of a meeting, after the discussion and the topic was, John would pipe up with a question or an observation that just blew me away. The depth and insight. And John's ability to synthesize everything that had been said in the room, sum it up, and ask a probing question about it later. I have used that model throughout my life, in my professional life, and I've had a lot of fun with it. And I learned that definitely from John. And then last on this particular list is Dennis Rainier. Denny gave me, when I was going to Olympic College, a job in the ham shack working with him, selling ham radio and electronic parts.
That's at CNG?
At CNG Electronics. So that was really, really helpful for me, and I made enough money to buy a Swan 350 on the day I left. I had made an application to Boeing, and Boeing hired me into their research and development labs. So that's the first segment that we have here for today, and there's lots of interesting and fun stories about the activities of the Radio Club of Tacoma, 6-meter bunny hunts, some of the field days, well, virtually all of the field days that were were always fun stuff, and other activities. So I've had a fun and interesting life because of ham radio.
Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time today. This is just part one of what will probably be at least 2, if not 3, similar videos. You've got such a longevity of history with the Radio Club at Tacoma and ham radio in general that we look forward to the subsequent episodes of this interview. So thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you. It's been fun.